Okay, hi, my name is David McGillivray and I'm Chair in Event and Digital Cultures at the University of West of Scotland. And this is my colleague Jennifer Jones, who's the Project Coordinator for the Digital Commonwealth Project, which we're going to talk about today. Specifically going to talk about how the Digital Commonwealth Project has relevance for digital learning, especially contained within the school environment. So just before we kind of start talking specifically about Digital Commonwealth and some of the outcomes of that project, it's important to talk about a preceding project which was called Citizen Relay, which has first really got us into this terrain round about how we might use the digital and digital media in particular to actually tell stories, to enable people, to potentially empower people to tell stories about their local community, all based round about the context of a large event. So we came at this from being interested in the kind of way in which events perhaps don't always connect with their local communities, but also about an interest in digital media and especially everyday and lowering the threshold for people to get involved in producing digital media. So the Citizen Relay project took place over the course of the London 2012 Olympic Games when the torch relay came to Scotland. And that was important because it provided a hook to get people interested in how they could use, for example, the device in their pocket, taking photographs, producing other forms of media that you see on the screen here, whether that's Facebook posts, whether that's Flickr, photographs, Instagram, little pieces of audio via a tool called Audioboo. And then we tried to aggregate that content. So we developed an infrastructure, a web environment where we could get people to share their content with us. And we pulled all that together into one space, which secured lots of kind of interest, lots of web hits from people who were interested in looking at local stories around about the Olympic torch relay when it came through Scotland. So from that we found it was a kind of really interesting way of engaging people. Most of the people who were involved in that project were volunteers. Most of the people who were involved had very little experience of producing media. These weren't professional media producers. But the outcome of it was a kind of large amount of content that again provided a kind of interest in nuanced reflection and rich reflection of the torch relay as it came through Scotland. So from the Citizen Relay project, which was funded through our Creative Scotland, we looked to develop something much larger, more in-depth kind of project that looked to address some of the challenges that we faced through Citizen Relay, which was that, for example, we hadn't been able to support people as much as we'd have liked to be able to develop their skills, sustain the use of those skills, have others around about them who could support them as part of a network, for example. So we decided to do a project that was called Digital Commonwealth, which is a big lottery funded project in collaboration with the Media Trust. And it is, as we say here, a creative response to the Commonwealth Games from across Scotland. And we try to involve a variety of communities, those from educational situations, so we're going to talk specifically about the schools programme today, but also those involved in community media, those involved in creative voices, which we described as the use of documentary film, songwriting, and also creative writing. So that we could get a kind of rich response from people who weren't involved in the organisation of the Commonwealth Games, maybe not even interested in the Commonwealth Games as a sports event, but were engaging with the notion of the Commonwealth and broader cultural, social issues that brought to their attention. So it was very much a hook again, like the Olympics, to get people interested in thinking about how they could be supported to produce media, how they could network that media together with others and create something quite powerful, which give people who perhaps haven't had a voice or that voice has been suppressed to a degree, the chance for their thinking to come out as part of a large project. So that in order to kind of make this project work, then we had felt it important to develop some kind of themes or framework through which people could talk about the Commonwealth. Commonwealth Games is a large project, lots of initiatives going on, but we wanted people to think, well, if you can address some of these broad themes within your work, then we can support you. So the schools project, just like other parts of the Digital Commonwealth project, were asked to think about themes around place, people, culture and exchange. So these were broad brush kind of themes that said, well, actually, if you're thinking about working in a workshop with a group of people, then why not get them to think about what they might want to produce, a story, a piece of film, a piece of creative writing, a video, a piece of audio, and do that through the context of these themes. And that was really valuable, I think, because it allowed people to get a handle on what they could do. I think if you leave this too open, then I think it's very difficult for people to think about what they would do. So it's not being overly prescriptive, but it's really important to give them some degree of framework through which to think about their ideas. Another kind of important part of the project that built upon our understanding of some of the weaknesses and limitations of Citizen Relay was to set out very clearly what the principles of the project were, so that people knew what they were sharing material with. They knew the kind of ethos of the project and the project team and the partnership, so that they knew kind of issues about why they would be sharing the content, where that content would go. So we tried to build on this notion of the common weal and the common purpose, that kind of at the heart of Commonwealth as a notion, and did that as a way to talk about media. And there's a lot of debate about how media is owned by particular organisations and some of the challenges there of data and who owns that data. And we want to actually immerse and embed this in the project. We're also interested in ownership in terms of people who are involved in the project being aware of where their content is hosted, that they can host it their own content in a space quite easily, inexpensively, and understand that they are then given rights to that content being used or licensed in different places. And so part of our workshops, both with schools and in other groups and organisations, was to talk about the importance of, in a pretty saturated media environment, but increasingly as people are spreading media through Facebook or YouTube or any other kind of platform, what about the issues of ownership of data there? This project was completely collaborative, so we worked in partnership as a project team with a set of trainers, with creative practitioners, working with our target organisations and target communities, and very much focused on the idea that produced content is fine. It's important to know how to produce content, so some of the kind of media production elements, but it's also important to share content, for that content to reach an audience, and for that audience then to interact with that content. And that was very much part of how we saw the Digital Commonwealth project working, and that's one of its major strengths. But not doing so in such a way that people weren't able to access it and understand how to get involved in the project. So this was about a low threshold of involvement into it. How can we enable people who had little experience to work with more experienced people to create content that then be made available to people, and actually people could access that. And the final kind of key theme or key principle is about archiving this. So we are in the process of archiving the project with the National Library of Scotland, thinking about some of the ethical, technical, legal dimensions of how do you archive content when you've created that content and generated that content with other people, or they've created it and generated it themselves and have shared it with us for a certain period. How do we ensure that we have the right permissions, that we have the right kind of understandings with people, that they know that that content will appear as a kind of maybe a captured website or captured material at some point in an archive in the future. So for the schools project in particular, we also tried to think about how we would visualise the kind of sheer level of participation in the project. And this map demonstrates where all over Scotland, as you can see, we produced content in collaboration with schools, with community organisations, but also with individuals. So we tried to represent that and visualise it so people who were getting involved in the project could see what other schools were involved, what other community organisations were involved. And again, this is also a kind of skills development part, a digital skills development element, because what we're finding here is that people are beginning to see and be able to click in through this kind of Google map here about what projects we're actually doing. So it's a shared and network dimension to the project too that encouraged people to get involved as much as allow people to showcase what they've done. So the specifics of the schools programme, which is the kind of focus of the presentation today, engaged a large number of schools. We tried, and our intention was to reach out to 32 local authorities in Scotland and get a cluster, a learning cluster for each of those 32 local authorities. So that was about trying to ensure that we had at least 20 pupils from each local authority area working on a project that they defined. Overall, we were successful at getting 23 out of the 32 local authorities signed up for that. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the challenges of actually reaching the right people within the local authorities. But overall, 585 learners were involved in the project through those 23 initiatives and projects. And again, we wanted to focus upon sort of transition initiatives, specifically looking at ensuring that primary and secondary schools were able to be involved. So the creation of a kind of cluster of 20 pupils across maybe a secondary school, and also their cluster primaries being involved in a number of the pupils from those coming together. And that was partly about ensuring that there's a degree of digital leadership taking place within the older pupils, but also about the younger pupils then being able to take that on board, and as they move up, also being able to share that with others. So very much a kind of idea that we would cascade the learning from the people who were involved in the project. And this also, I think, allowed people to think about and the way we designed the schools programme was that people submitted proposals, allowed them to be creative. So this notion of creative citizenship in their own definition of projects that were relevant to the Commonwealth, but also to our project specifically. And that's crucial, I think, in terms of getting people on board, that you don't overly prescribe, but that you provide them with scope to ensure that they can do what they also want to do and is relevant to their curriculum, stage of curriculum, or to their local context, i.e. which part of Scotland they may be located within. Jen?
Yeah, so I guess my role in the project as project coordinator was to turn the sort of vision of delivering a digital literacy project across Scotland and be able to contextualise that within the projects that the schools are submitting. So it was about trying to get the pupils and learners, teachers to own the stories that they were taking part in. And this was really taken through from application right through to delivery. I'll move on to the next slide, which was about how we actually did it. So as an organisation based within a university, we were interested in, I guess, learning outcomes, the curriculum for excellence, and how we deliver this level of learning, informal learning, in a classroom environment that was across the board. So we defined what the learning would be around the notion of digital storytelling, and when we looked at digital storytelling, we were looking at 4 elements, which were blogging, video, audio and social media. And we looked at some models in terms of how we were going to deliver that in a consistent format across all the local authorities that engaged in the project. We were working with a series of freelance trainers who had experience in delivering elements of digital storytelling, and we really wanted the schools and the trainers to feel comfortable in terms of how they felt in delivering these digital literacy skills. So we looked at models such as Mozilla's Open Badges, which is a tool for being able to accredit certain forms of informal learning. The Open Badges allowed us to think about what sort of initiative would encourage people to follow through on a project such as this, but also took us into other territories such as Mozilla's WebMaker as a tool for delivering content to the trainers to then deliver content to the teachers, and we'll include links to this at the end of the presentation. So these are some examples of the Mozilla WebMaker as a tool for supporting the trainers and the teachers in delivering digital literacy skills to their learners and pupils. So I guess when we think about this, what works when you're delivering a project of this scale? What worked fantastically was the collaborative element of working between different schools and being able to work between different platforms. In some cases, the schools had access to their own blogs, and through tools such as Glow, which supported WordPress, the pupils, teachers and trainers were able to host their own content on their own server as part of their school's online identity. Where this wasn't possible, we were able to provide access to a web platform that was hosted on our server, or we were able to provide support to help them use free tools that were available. We'll talk a little bit more at the end about the challenges of this, but when it did work, it allowed for schools to be able to connect to each other, and the example we have on the screen is a blog post that was produced by learners in Rossi Primary, and the comments were on their blog post was from pupils from Shetland Primary, so they were able to see what the different island living looked like, and also their different creative responses to the Digital Commonwealth project. We were able to work between different types of community as well. Specifically with the school programme, it wasn't just limited to stories about schools. The example we've got on the screen is with a project in East Lothian, which was an intergenerational project where young people interviewed older people about their memories of sport. It was based in North Berwick, working with Roommate and the Sporting Memories project. We also worked with different community projects and youth work projects which crossed over different types of external funded projects, which meant that we weren't just operating within a school, we were operating within community groups, and that worked really well and allowed for certain levels of network reach of the project so people found out about it in other ways. We also had an element of international links and how they were sustained. So with the Isle of Egg and Muck, they made connections to other island communities in the Commonwealth to be able to discuss what it was like to train for sporting events such as the Commonwealth Games when you are living on such a small island. Other schools looked at different Commonwealth countries and then reported about their learning on their blog or through video or audio. And with the transition cluster element, it allowed for us to think about Commonwealth in a different context. So the video below on the screen at the moment is with Open Primary Cluster, where they have the largest catchment of primary schools in Scotland. So we were able to show and learn, and as pupils were able to articulate what it means to come from that area and be able to have to travel so far to go to school. So their video was, the final project was about the Commonwealth of Islands that make up Open, so it's the creative response again. Another aspect that worked was using hashtags and other online network tools. So by using the DigCW 2014 hashtag, we were able to connect projects beyond the scope of the schools and the community groups. The example on the screen is when Rossi Primary, during their social media workshop, tweeted about being part of it and see how far it could go. And as it stands, is currently nearly at 1,500 retweets. By able to show this and demonstrate this in a safe and focused way, the pupils could understand the value and also the scope of being able to use Twitter in this way. And this has continued post Digital Commonwealth to be able to link projects together and to continue the dialogue beyond the workshop training.
And so it was important to think about what worked and the successes, and that's something that we continue to do and look at how those continue and are sustainable, because that's an important element of the intention of our project. But of course, with these kind of projects, large, multifaceted, across geographical areas with various partners, you also lead to a number of challenges that do impinge upon the success and also the way in which you would design and develop a project in the future. So, just some of these, for example, securing access to the right people, and I mean the right people is the important point in local authorities, to actually get to them about the project and engage them with raising their awareness, but also getting people to sign up for why they would want to get involved and taking that to the right learning cluster, because again we were only looking at 20 pupils within each local authority area ultimately, was a challenge. And partly that was about the difficulty of communicating what the project was going to be about before people could see an output coming through, i.e. we didn't have schools producing outputs, blogs, video, audio or social media work before we were getting others to sign up for the project. So that these are challenges. There were ones that we overcame in the main, but these are the sorts of things you have to be aware of. And added to that is, I guess, the fact that the Commonwealth Games were taking place in 2014 and of course in 2013 onwards, that there was this big debate about getting schools involved in projects. And I've described this as initiative overload. And, there lots of schools were doing Commonwealth related games and sports events, and again getting to them to convince them of the value of thinking more broadly about the notions of the Commonwealth and doing a creative project was at times difficult, and understandably because of the emphasis on sport around the games. And the kind of final point here about the continuity of attendees, making sure that we got the 20 students to be at all 4 of the sessions, so that there's an integrated understanding of how to tell stories digitally, as opposed to having an additional number of pupils coming through under each workshop and not necessarily seeing the coherence of that whole as opposed to the individual components. And I think we believe strongly that actually the integration is what makes digital storytelling really effective, not the understanding of each individual component, i.e. the ability to produce a film or to produce a bit of audio is nothing without being able to think about how you would host that, where you would host it, and how you would talk about it and communicate about it through social media, for example. The other sort of challenges that we faced were around notions of equipment. So we made a deliberate and conscious decision not to provide every school who was involved with equipment at the beginning, i.e. to buy in a certain amount of equipment and hand that over to a school to do their project with. And the reason was specifically about the sustainability of that. We wanted to develop the literacies of the groups of students and of staff involved in the project, so that post-project they would understand more effectively how to use the equipment they had. And most of the schools we worked with had equipment, rather than to give them high-spec, high-production value pieces of equipment that they couldn't use or wouldn't find a use for beyond the length of the project. So the lack of available equipment in some contexts was difficult, but actually I think more problematic at times was the software and the kind of functioning IT environment, the infrastructure around about that. Because again we found that the sites were blocked for staff and of course for pupils to use, across authorities, but even within authorities there was differences within there. So it wasn't that we had the same experience in each local authority or within each local authority, even across different schools. So this is an issue, I think, for education authorities in Scotland to think about, because we were able to provide, our trainers were able to provide the sorts of websites that we're looking to access beforehand, but that still made the project really quite difficult to deliver. And that, if it was difficult for us to deliver, then that same experience will be had by those trying to deliver digital media work within schools more generally. And I think that's something we need to try and focus upon and work through and find solutions for. I think the different engagement and teaching styles is also an element there, in terms of just the sorts of projects that were created and the sorts of experience of our trainers in terms of what they would have envisaged as delivery of media production, for example. So again, we had to work very closely. One of the reasons we asked people to produce their own project ideas was that we wanted to be able to be flexible and respond with the right sets of skills for each group based upon what their intended outcomes were. And we did manage that in most contexts, but there were occasions where that was more difficult, because putting a trainer in with a group who weren't that sure about what they were looking to do meant that you get less out of the workshops. So preparation, ensuring that people are absolutely sure what the 2.5 hour workshop is going to be about and what outcomes are going to come from that, and how that's going to lead towards the development of a project and some outputs, digital artifacts at the end, is kind of value. And finally, on the kind of challenges, being able to actually understand the level of competence, as in what have the children done before, what equipment have they used before, what IT infrastructure and supports in place, and how competent are those people to be able to do some of the things that we may wish to do. So often we had quite optimistic project ideas and we want to support those, but the infrastructure or the support network perhaps wasn't in place to ensure that those people were easily able to produce what they felt they were intending doing. So again, these are all kind of issues that you need to keep in mind when you think about doing digital projects, and especially if they involve external partners, like, for example, ourselves, bringing those forward.
Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the lessons from this, so the overall lessons of working with the 23 local authorities. So I'll take each one of these headings separately. So I guess building on what David's point is about communicating expectations, so the understanding that digital can mean very different things to very different contexts and very different people. Some people will be aware of digital projects and have their assumptions set, and others will consider themselves, at the amount of time people have said I'm a tech Luddite, yet they can whiz around an iPad very, very quickly. So it's been very, very clear about the purpose of the digital when you're teaching this stuff and what you can and can't do in a session. We can confuse computer science with media studies, with IT training, with digital literacy. So one of the main things following on from the development of materials and resources was, how do you articulate what exactly we're delivering in the class and what we can and can't do as external providers? One of the focus really for us was developing a sustainable practice rather than just simply teaching a technology. Each school had its own set of equipment, as David mentioned, but they may not realise that equipment they could use could be used in this context. For instance, many schools had access to Easy Speaks, and teachers thought that these were tools for younger pupils to learn how to spell, but actually they're just small MP3 recorders dressed up as small microphones, which are perfect because the learners already understand them as a recording device, but might not have known they could use it to interview people with. So they were using the Easy Speaks as a tool to learn how to do interviews, and that skill can take with them.
And I think what's important there, just to add in, is that we have a schools competition at the end of the project, where those that were produced the most sustainable digital media artifacts, the most creative, and those that had the most experience of community engagement as part of their projects were all put forward for prizes. And we deliberately again used that as a way of providing monies to schools at the end for the good work that they've done, to ensure that they could then make decisions about purchasing the right sort of equipment and the right sort of technologies, for example, that they may need to be able to continue their practice. So that was about being more demand-led, so being able to say, well, actually, the schools now understand what they need to use and what they can use, and perhaps buying more relatively cheap equipment may be more advantageous to the school being able to embed digital media than to buy one large camera that only one person knows how to operate.
Okay, the second learning point is around the technology. So a pre-workshop tech audit is essential. If you're going to deliver a workshop relating to digital literacies, you need to understand what the school has already and what access the school has to certain equipment. You could be lucky and you could walk in and all the kids have access to laptops, on Wi-Fi and cameras and everything's ready to go. Or you could be in a position where even using Google is a problem, so it's being prepared. We even had techniques down to, if you couldn't tweet, we were using post-it notes and learning the practice of tweeting through paper tweets. So it's coming up with tools and devices to teach these skills without relying on the technology working. And you have to anticipate the time it takes to maybe remove these blocks and gain access, because actually when you ask permission and you state why you're doing it, most people are willing to help you out. So it's not a case of, we've blocked this site, you're not getting on it. It's more a case of, how do we open this door and how can we make it better? And projects like ours, I feel, have been able to give people the chance to ask these questions, where maybe before it would have been, it's too much hassle to be able to get the access.
And there's already good practice in parts of, and this is what we find in parts of Scotland and in parts of local authorities, there's some really excellent leadership and practice that means that things are opened up more so than in others. And I think that's something, again, to understand as we go forward, about how more of those local authorities and educational authorities can be opened up to the kind of agenda, and to think carefully about how they develop policies for their school and for their local authority area.
Okay. And flexibility, I think, as a trainer and as a project coordinator, has been pretty vital when it's came to this, because we are dealing with various different contexts. When it comes to ICT, you have no guarantee that it's going to work, so be prepared to teach without any technology. They're universal skills that we're teaching them in terms of digital storytelling, how to interview people, how to do research before you turn the camera on, rather than just simply handing cameras and audio equipment to young people. By doing the research, that means that they don't need to do as much editing, it saves time, and being able to write for a public audience, so moving from writing essays, stories and jotters and in Word documents to be able to write for a potentially public audience is a skill that we all need to be able to think about when we're moving into a sort of digital space. And because the schools had up to 4 sessions, it meant that we could be adaptable. So if week 1 we found that there was an issue with the technology, then be able to fix that before week 2 or 3 meant that we could move things around. So having those 4 areas meant that we could be flexible rather than just delivering one straight up workshop in one go. So yeah,
I think the importance of the universal skills is to be emphasised, and one of the outputs of our project was to produce a digital storytelling handbook, which again has been made available and will be made available to schools and local authorities, which is a kind of relatively accessible document, electronic and available in hard copy, that just gives advice to those looking to do digital storytelling work about the sorts of questions to ask, about some approaches to how you go about interviewing, some tips on how to get good quality sound and how to get good quality video without necessarily being an expert and without necessarily having the high value equipment that may need to come. So that's the sort of this a sustainable legacy of the project, that people can use that to be able to develop their own skills.
Okay, and the next lesson is about relationships. A lot of time was spent finding the right people who would be able to help us access the right school, the right teachers and the right learners, people that would be able to take on a project like this, which was slightly different outside of curriculum but fitting within the initiatives asked of the Glasgow 2014 Games. So you have to anticipate the amount of face-to-face time required to be able to get these projects. And once those doors are open and those relationships are made, it's been able to think, what can we do next and how can we sustain or build upon some of these relationships. Much of our time as project coordinators was spent finding and communicating and identifying a person who would be willing to work with us. And when we found that person, it was like as if it was the easiest thing in the world to get the young people. Also, from another perspective, is the connections and the networks that the young people can bring to this. Now, the picture we've got on the screen is a footballer who plays for Dundee, Jim McAllister, and he actually was an alumni of Rossi Primary and was willing to come in and speak to the young people for an audio interview. Being able to connect the skills in terms of being able to interview for radio or interview for an audio programme with actually interviewing one of their heroes from the island was just something that really connected the students and be able to help them understand the importance of being able to get that interview first right and using the right equipment. So it's been able to build on relationships, and thanks to things like social media, you can make those connections and be creative in terms of what you can do with the content. So it doesn't need to just be working within the classroom and practice interviews. The more we kind of got into it, the more we realised we could connect to people from Team Scotland or people that were working on Glasgow 2014 related projects. So it was really quite exciting when that happened. And I guess the last one is about empowerment. And this word can be a little bit shaky, because empowerment means that, you know, we've left them and they're all happy, but it's around maybe demystifying risk to help with empowerment by developing good practice and operating from a positive position rather than a position where you feel like your hands are tied and you can't do something because somebody said you can't do it. By offering good practice, and as the momentum grew through more and more schools taking part, it meant that the risk was becoming demystified, that we could be able to share stories of other schools taking part. So, for instance, if one local authority was allowing one school to be able to use their mobile devices and bring their own devices to school, then it meant that we could show another local authority that might be a little bit apprehensive about doing that it's okay, look, this is how they did it and this is how they got around certain issues without much aggro or challenge. And it also widened the discussions in terms of new media and education in general, because why are some local authorities able to offer certain access to digital literacy and others aren't? And it's down to that relationships and networks again. And by building confidence in using these tools, they get to try new things and realise that actually some of the common myths around digital safety and digital literacies are actually able to be addressed through conversation rather than through simply saying, no, you're not using it. And it's been able to get that balance correct that allows for empowerment rather than simply saying, we're going to open all the doors, everyone make some stuff, build it and they will come. It's about being able to have a dialogue between all the people involved.
And I think, just to sort of finish, I think the nature of dialogue and conversation and seeing that as something that's ongoing rather than something that just happens around about an event like the Commonwealth Games, it's kind of really important to us, and it's really important to the debate around about the use of digital media in school environments, risk narratives, opportunities that come from that. So the Digital Commonwealth project will end, but the kind of discussion and debate needs to continue. And partly our website here, which you can see on the screen, is one way in which you can engage with us. You can engage through social media platforms that we use, but also by using and adapting and getting in touch with us about the handbook that's been produced and actually embedding that within the work that we do within schools, but also in the wider community, because the handbook's available for those who might wish to be creating a story about their community and thinking about how they can better represent themselves via that environment. You can get in touch with us at the university on these details, and again, we look forward to continuing the conversation with those people interested in the use of digital media in an environment where media surrounds us.